What up, Wizards? It's Deb from the place. Bring a bucket and a mop because it's time for the first deck tech of Tarkir Dragonstorm, y'all. And I hope you called your mom because we're getting in with a bunch of dudes. Know how much she likes that. Let's take a look at Mardu Mobilize.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back. Hit that thumb button and submarine the sandwich. But I want to go ahead and get to it because I have not played Red, White, Black in a while, and I'm excited to see what that Mardu do. Especially now that we got some new tools from the Tarkir Dragonstorm like Zurgo, Thunder's Decree over here. I like to call him Zurgo because I've learned to respect him. And so will you. Now, in case you haven't seen this gorgeous slab of man yet, and I know you have, you clicked on the video with full knowledge of what both he and Mobilize do. Just humor me for a second. He's got this cool ability called Mobilize that you've never heard of. When a creature with Mobilize attacks, it's going to make some number of little dudes. In this case, with Zurgo, it's 2 because he's got Mobilize 2, and in the game of Magic the Gathering, that is apparently how numbers work. Now, normally, at the end of the turn, these guys would, commit seppuku or something. I'm not really sure exactly what's going on with them, but when Zurgo's around, he sees that happening. He's like, "Oi then, what are you doing, mate?" And they're like, "Oi, we're dying for the cause then, Gov." And he's like, "Well, you don't have to do that." And they're like, "Well, we thought we did have to do that." And he's like, "No, you never had to do that then, bruv." And they're like, "Well, all right. Let's have bread and jam." And he's like, "Oh, yes, bread and jam then. That sounds good." I don't know why my entire mind works like a Monty Python joke, but it's always been that way. The point to that whole stupid line of thought, I guess at least, is that once you have your Zurgo out, you get to keep all your little mobilized dudes, which is awesome in a deck full of dudes what has that keyword in it. I don't know why I keep doing the British thing today. This would be so much easier and more funny if I was Spice 8 Rack. I would also be at least 5.5 times more handsome, and I wonder what that's like. Better yet, actually, I wish I was Zurgo, because then I'd be 9 times as handsome. He's a very pretty man. But another reason I learned to respect this guy when I really didn't have the highest hopes for him at first, I want to make that clear, is that he's actually got a really good stat line. A 3-mana 2/4 isn't amazing. It's Preacher of the Schism. That's okay. But what it does mean is that it doesn't die to a whole lot of really important removal, and it also doesn't die to combat so much. 4 toughness is pretty decent when it comes to rumbling, so a lot of the time that'll help him get in and then get in again on the next turn. Everybody likes a dude who can get it in more than once. This guy can also take over the game just completely by himself if left unchecked, because turn over turn, you're going to be getting more and more tokens while your opponent fails to draw the removal spells. So again, I didn't really have the highest hopes for this dude going in, but he taught me a couple of lessons. He's still not the best dude in the deck. Those spots are reserved for the next couple of cards we're going to talk about, but he did a lot more than just sit around looking pretty. But hey, does that pretty good too, if I say so myself. Looking good, you barrel-chested himbo you. But let's move on to a couple of cards that impressed me more than Zurgo, and honestly, I think could rule standard outside of the Mardu Mobilize deck before it's all said and done. We'll start by looking at Stadium Headliner right here. There's a reason that's his name, son. This thing should be on the marquee. Look at our special boy with his name in lights. I'm so proud of him. This dude is kind of the difference between winning and losing a lot of games. You don't have to draw him on turn 1, but especially if you go first, if you start the game with this dude in play on turn 1, that has dramatically improved your chances of winning. Like the guy whose job it is to paint the football field, he's just really good at setting up our lines for us, man. He's amazing in decks that care about the number of creatures they have in play, which we are one of those. And he's also really good in decks that have enter the battlefield triggers whenever you play a creature. And again, we're also one of those decks. There's just really no better way we could hope to get started on turn 1 than this dude. But the other card that at the end of the day really made this deck feel worth playing was Voice of Victory, the voice of a generation, and that you really don't see a card like this more than once every 25 years or so. You see this little yellow peach over here rocking out. I really respect that. Does have Mobilize too, and that's sick in this deck, don't get me wrong, but it's that line of text right there. They can't cast spells during your turn. That is just an incredible line of text, especially for a deck that's looking to attack a lot. And really one of the best things about this ability is the fact that this is a brand new card, and the amount of times that my opponents effectively just forgot that this card did what it does is very high. I would say that it's actually approaching the double digits. I played probably, 8 hours of this deck on Arena and a whole week of playtesting it in paper through proxies before that. And the amount of times people just "Oh yeah, Voice Victory, I can't kill that guy on your turn. Crap." It's kind of a lot. But even once people have gotten used to the card and they know they can't play spells on your turn, it's still massively irritating for them that they can't. Do you understand how important it is for them to be able to play spells during your combat step, and how extremely liberating it is for you to be able to swing into any amount of open mana knowing that you're going to be okay. This card affords you that kind of insurance, and unlike most kinds of insurance, this is the kind I don't mind paying for. Although you do have to kind of pay a lot. It's like $15 for this card right now. What's that about, man? It is a really, really strong looking card, and like I said, I think it'll probably see some play from time to time, maybe even beyond standard, but 15... You talking about $15 in this economy? It's ridiculous. I would imagine this card's probably going to come down from here, and when it does, probably scoop it up. It's a ridiculous card. I imagine it's even decent in like EDH because, again, the ability to just play your turn, screw everybody else. Again, very freeing. It's very Pokemon-like quality, right? Like, oh, it's my turn, so I just get to play my cards, and you can't. You have to wait for your turn to play your cards. That's awesome. I like that. So, again, just play Voice of Victory. I don't think you're probably too shocked to see it here, but I'm also playing 4 copies because I cannot help myself. A War Leader's Call. Now, at first, I wanted this to be like a 4 Impact Tremors, 4 War Leader's Call, 4 Shocking Sharpshooter, that new guy that's basically an Impact Tremors with the legs. I wanted this to be that kind of deck, but you probably shouldn't do that. I learned quite quickly. So with that said, I did keep the War Leader's Call for a couple of reasons. It is amazing with Mobilize because you're just dealing extra damage when your Mobilized dudes come into play, but it's also giving the Mobilized dudes a little anthem. So a thing like Voice of Victory doesn't look great as a 1/3 that makes a couple of 1/1s, but as a 2/4 that makes a couple of 2/2s, well, now you've paid effectively 2 mana for like 6 power every turn. But there is another 3-drop I'm playing that I felt was really important to the build once things were all said and done. That is Sanguine Evangelist over here, man. We can't really get away with Immodane's Recruiter tricks and stuff because, you know, we're going to play the Recruiter and all of our Mobilized guys get a +1/+0 bonus. That's awesome. But the little dudes they make won't get the bonus from Recruiter. So that kind of feels like a waste. That said, Evangelist works because we can stack the triggers in such a way that we make the Mobilized guys first and then the Battle Cry trigger goes off and all of our little dudes get that nice +1/+0. But Evangelist also just works really well with War Leader's Call, right? We're putting a bunch of power on the table and dealing a couple of damage. When the Sanguine Evangelist dies, we'll could put some more power on the table and deal even more damage. It also gives us flying dudes, which we really don't have a whole lot of in this deck, and can't take that for granted. Here's where things get a little bit more complicated, because so far we've been looking mostly at 4-ofs, and that looks like a pretty well-organized deck. Got all of its strongest pieces in order. That's nice. Well, here's the deal. I am playing a fair number of 2-ofs in this deck, mostly because I'm trying to fill out the 1 and 2 drop slots as powerfully as I can, but it turned out a lot of those slots were taken up by legendary creatures we can't play a bunch of copies of. So with that in mind, let's start looking at these. Beginning with Arabella Abandoned Doll, I, again, cannot help myself sometimes. But this is obviously more than just cute. This already sees play in a fair number of Boros and Jeskai tokens and Convoke decks and stuff, because if you get one attack step in with it, it can just end the game by dealing like 6 to 8 damage, and it does the exact same thing here. And just like Sanguine Evangelist, you can again stack the triggers in such a way that you get your Mobilized dudes first, and then Arabella hits for her damage. Bella's also really good in any sort of like aggressive mirror match, making sure that you gain some of that life back, keep up in the trenches when you're racing. There's a lot to like about this card, but I really don't want to play a ton of copies of it. And the same is true of Skrelv Defector Might. I needed to fill out the 1-drop slot here, and I did that in a couple of creative ways, and I really turned over a bunch of stones trying to find the best 1-drop for this deck. I tried everything down to Exuberant Fuseling, which does look really cute in this deck, but really takes a little bit too much time to get the power that you needed to get, right? So I was stuck with some options here, but I'm not stuck, right? That's the good kind of problem to have. So we ended up with a couple of Skrelv because this is ideal with any Mobilized dude, right? The problem with the Mobilized guy is that once it goes into combat, it can be blocked and killed. But with a Skrelv, you can make sure that creatures can get in for combat damage. And if you have an important creature like a Zurgo or a Voice of Victory that you want to protect, well, Skrelv does that too. All while letting you get on the table as early as turn 1 and counting as a creature for like Stadium Headliner and War Leader's Call purposes. There's just a lot of reasons to play some copies of Skrelv in the deck. But again, we're an aggro deck. We need to make all of our early draws count as much as possible, so we can't run the risk of drawing a bunch of different copies of the same legends. So keeping a lot of our legends down to a 2-of here, like Basri. I'm actually playing Basri Tomorrow's Champion in this deck because it turns out it's a great deck to play Basri Tomorrow's Champion in. Who would have thought that that deck existed? But here, I think we finally found it. This is a legendary little Savannah Lions dude that has a nice stat line, and he can exert to make a lifelink guy, which is awesome, again, when you're trying to get a little defensive with your game plan. But again, this works for Stadium Headliners, creature count. It works for War Leader's Call every other turn, putting a creature into play. It has lifelink and a decent power thanks to that Anthem effect. Pretty sweet. Plus you get a little ping, like whatever, you know? Like Basri turned out to be, I think, one of the better one-drop options for the deck, and I did want at least 8 one-drop creatures. And Basri helped us get to that count, and he's honestly pretty good in his role. You should try him before you fry him. But we also ended up on 2 copies of Velosil Core in the deck. Again, I feel like weird and indulgent saying this for the 3rd time in the video, but I cannot help myself and who I am. But despite the fact that she's my fiance, I still was able to remain as unbiased as possible here and keep this down to 2 copies as well, despite the fact that it works insanely well with Mobilize. At first, I was afraid that this would just be too cute because, I mean, come on. She is. Look at her. Her little cheeks, she's adorable. But still, I thought that this just wasn't quite where we wanted to be in Mobilize. But at the end of the day, I did need more 2-drop creatures. So we didn't quite get enough good ones with Mobilize or ones with Mobilize at all. When am I going to play Shock Brigade in this deck? I'm not going to do that in a big boy deck. We'll talk more about Shock Brigade in a second. You'll be surprised. The thing just does multiple things. It does 2 things with Mobilize, and that is a lot. It's enough to play the card, and I'm really happy because I was pretty sure this thing was going to get cut very quickly, but actually she stuck it out like the entire time I was building the deck, because turns out I wanted to draw this card on like turn 3 a good bit of the time. But even after all that finagling with the legendary dudes, I still had to finish filling out not just the creatures, but the 2-drop slot. It's very important this deck gets a creature on turn 2, and there's a lot of options, it turns out, in these 3 color combinations. And I'm not sure what you would end up going with, but end of the day, I decided to finish off with a creature that I was also worried would be too cute, but it turns out is just extremely powerful with Mobilize. I ended up on 2 copies of Sky Knight Squire over here, and that's a good thing because I keep looking for a deck for this card. And I haven't really found one yet, you know, just like Basri. Turns out you would think that both of these cards would go in the cat deck, but the cat deck just isn't very good, bless its heart. Turns out, though, that this was the deck for this thing. You get in with a couple of Mobilized guys, and this dude just like immediately gains flying. Like the turn he comes into play. It is not too hard to boost this guy's PT really, really high, literally the same turn that you play him. But by the time he actually gets attacking, it can get very, very nasty. This is actually the largest creature in the deck by a huge margin, because if you're even just attacking with like 1 Mobilized guy, it can get up to a 6/6 in just the span of a turn or 2. Now that is every creature in the deck, a total of 24 of them in all, and the War Leader's Call too, so that's 28 slots used. We don't have a whole lot left, so let's use it on the best removal spells in Standard. This color combination does not play when it comes to removal, so let's put some of that into our veins. We got 3 copies of Get Lost to get started here. Probably the best single target removal spell in all of Standard. You know, you want to point and click. Get Lost has got your back, baby. Even blows up enchantments, which is really good in the current environment. But I'm also on 2 copies of Go for the Throat here because I felt like I wanted 5 of these like 2-mana point and click removal spells at instant speed, but it'd be nice if a couple of them didn't give the opponent map tokens. Hence, a couple of GFTTs. But I'm also on 2 copies of Burst Lightning, and I am very aware that Torch the Tower looks good in this deck because we're making tokens. You can sack the tokens in your second main phase to the Torch the Tower's bargain ability, blow stuff up, sounds good at Exiles. But honestly, we ended up being a pretty aggro-y build here, and there's a lot of games where you get them to like 4 and you can't finish, but this will help you do that once you kick it, and that did come up more than once. But I'm also on a couple of copies of a brand new spell here, Frontline Rush, which was actually insanely good. I didn't use this as a removal spell more than a few times in all of my like 2 weeks of testing. I usually use this as a combat trick, whether I was using it to boost a lowly Mobilized token into a thing that kills an Archfiend to the Dross or whatever. Like, that's easy enough to do, but sometimes your opponent just doesn't let a Mobilized token through, or, you know, lets a Mobilized token through rather, and that thing now does 9 damage just because they didn't block it, so I guess they're dead. Very, very cool to have like a Might of the Masses effect in this deck, but it also gives us like a 13th or 14th main deck removal spell. Again, we are not messing around when it comes to removal in this deck. If you count the Stadium Headliner, we are blowing everything in Standard up. Now, we're able to play 23 lands in this pile because we don't play any 4 drops. Again, more on that and why I didn't in just a second. I think it's obvious why I didn't. We'll talk about the ones I didn't in a second. That's probably the way I want to phrase it. One way or the other, the mana base is fairly easy here, except for one special card I want to point out called Dalkovan Encampment. Now, we don't have a ton of swamps or mountains in this mana base. You may notice it can come into play untapped, but in most games it won't. Here's my retort. Don't care. This is just so good in the late game. It's really good against sweepers, which we will encounter over and over and over, and it's especially amazing with War Leader's Call, where it can do up to like 4 damage, 6 damage a turn, really. But even if you're just getting in for a couple of damage a turn because of the War Leader's Call triggers, that's still good enough to win a lot of games based on the strength of those 2 cards alone. I just wanted to give a special shout out to Encampment. This thing's only like 50 cents right now for some reason, and it carried me through a whole bunch of games against like mono white and other sweeper heavy piles and stuff. So love you, bud. You did so much. But let's look at the sideboard real quick. And again, we're going to be flexing our swamps a little bit more in the sideboard because we got 3 copies of Duress to start things off. Now, I toyed around with like Invasion of Gobakhan, and if you're just like red-white and you want to drop the black from the deck entirely, which might be the right idea, just letting you know, I think Invasion of Gobakhan is the way you want to go. But if we are going to play swamps, I think Duress is actually one of the best reasons to do so. Now, I was just talking about Torch the Tower a second ago, and you may notice I have snuck one into the board. That's mostly so we can take care of Mosswood Dread Knights and Unstoppable Slashers and other stuff that we would elsewise have to worry about come later on in the game. I just want to exile some creatures, and Torch is really good at that. If we are trying to respect decks like Mono Red, it's always good to have another small ball removal spell. Also packing a couple of Rest in Peace for the occasional Reanimator deck. That should shut them down nicely. But there's also a couple of Urbrass Forge in here. Not only one of the best, but also perhaps the most obvious card for the sideboard in a deck like this. If the game's going to go long, if we're going to get swept a bunch of times, this will keep us in said game. Super important, and even combos with another card in our sideboard nicely. But apart from that, we've got a couple of Enduring Innocence. Again, the game is going long. We want to draw some cards and keep up card advantage. That's the same reason we're playing 1 copy of Takasia's Welcome as well. But there's also 2 split ups in here, mostly against other aggressive decks. It's actually kind of amazing, depending on how you take your game actions, how lopsided you can make this card against opposing aggro decks. So definitely play a couple of copies. But there's also 2 copies of Elspeth Stormslayer. Look, if you don't want to pay $100 for 2 copies of this card, all you got to do is play like Destroy Evil or something, which is still a great Magic card and works very, very well on the sideboard of this deck. We want to blow up more enchantments, and big creatures are very good against us. Maybe play Destroy Evil if you don't have $100. But in case you do have a couple of copies of Stormslayer, this is fantastic, again, for longer games. We almost have a kind of transformational sideboard here where we're sort of boarding into the Boros Forge deck from a few months ago, right? We don't have all the Sunfalls or the Day of Judgments, but we do have a couple of sweepers and split up. We have the Enduring Innocence, the Takasi is welcome to stay drawing cards throughout the course of the game. We have the Forge, right? But Forge is especially good with Stormslayer because it will make 2 of those Forge tokens every turn, and that will win you the game pretty fast. So again, I won't quite call this a transformational sideboard, but it's about as close as a deck can get. Now, as usual, there were a ton of cards that I didn't end up playing in this deck, regardless of whether or not I actually tried them, and a few of them I absolutely did try and thought would be ridiculous, and they just kind of ended up disappointing me a little bit, right? Like I've already talked about Exuberant Fuseling and other cute stuff like that, but I also tried cute things like Delny as like a one-of in the deck, and as cool as it can be with like Arabella and all of our Mobilize dudes, because we will get extra dudes off Mobilize, that's sick, but honestly, the one-of Delny just kind of got in my way and its own way and my dudes' ways like a lot of the time, you know what I mean? We have to be pretty picky about what 3-drops we play, and honestly, Delny just felt kind of slow to me. And if I'm being picky about 3-drops, and I have to be really choosy about 4-drops, which I didn't end up playing at all, but I was kind of excited to try out Bone Cairn Butcher outside of Limited. Turns out that's what it's made for, is probably just keep it in Limited. But I also tried a 4-drop that I was super excited to try a 2 of. That's Nerev, Heart of the Storm. This, I thought was going to be great with the Mobilized dudes, but it turned out it's actually just kind of a trash Magic card in a deck like this. It's just a big dumb body that usually eats a go for the throat or something the turn that it comes down. But even if it ostensibly does what it's supposed to be doing, it's not really doing that much. Like, okay, my 1/1s now do 2 damage, big freaking whoop. I guess if you have a War Leader's Call and they're dealing like 4 damage apiece, that's good, but it just never did that kind of labor for me. That also meant that stuff like All Out Assault was right out. I've seen some people playing 1 or 2 copies of this, and I just wouldn't dare to do that. Maybe it's good in some situations, but honestly, I think 5 mana is just way too much for a deck like this. There were a couple of other things I tried, like say Thunder of Unity, but that just turned out to be a terrible Magic card. It's just not good at all. And I think, for one, that it's important to play good Magic cards in your deck. I know that's sounds like a load coming from me. Did you guys see the Ellysil Core in this deck? I trust me, it's actually pretty decent. But either way, I think this deck is good enough that you can put together a budget version of it and still do really, really well, which we have done here. If you take a look at this, there's a couple of things we had to take out. Voice of Victory is far too much for a budget deck. In paper, it's $15, and on Arena, it's a whole rare wild card, which I try not to use too many of. As a matter of fact, we kicked an entire color out of our deck. We are just Boros for the budget build. We're trying out Shocking Sharpshooter, which I wanted to do in the original build, but again, I felt like it was too silly to play like 12 different Impact Trimmers effects. So in this deck, we're just going to take out the War Leader's Call because it's way too expensive for our budget, and instead play 4 more War Leader's Call effects than we were originally playing in the first place. Funny how that worked out. We also get to try stuff like Shock Brigade, which I was ribbing on a little bit earlier, but it's actually a serviceable little guy, man. It gets in on turn 3 a good bit unblocked because of the menace. Again, especially on the play, it's fairly easy for this dude to survive at least one combat step, so you just want a bunch of Mobilize triggers in a game, and this guy helps you get them. But in the 3-drop slot, I had a couple of options, but I ended up falling in love with Dalkovan Pack Beast, man, more than a lot of other cards even available for the Mobilize strategy. This can help you get in and still play defense. It's not getting in for any damage itself, but it's making 3 tokens a turn, which is awesome with all of your Impact Trimmers effects, but it has Vigilance, so it still blocks pretty well with a decently sized butt, man. I was kind of impressed by the Pack Beast. Didn't make the main deck, obviously, but it's not a terrible card. Altogether, this budget build ain't but about $25 to put together, and that is with all these lands, so I think it's kind of a steal here. And of course, you can upgrade it with War Leader's Calls and Voice of Victories as you get them, but honestly, I don't feel like you ever have to add the swamps, so that'll save you a lot in terms of the mana base. Now it's almost time for them power rankings, example game, then we're going to bring it home. We've had such a good time together and it is almost over, but since it has been such a long road to travel, I'd like to just take a quick second to gather our thoughts here, sit right down by this fire, and have ourselves a nice little coffee break. This week, on the coffee break, we'll be discussing the 5 best cards to play in the 99 of your Zurgo Thunder's Decree Commander deck. The first problem that Mobilize players must solve in Commander is not only the fact that your opponents are threefold, but also that they have twice as many life points as they would normally have. These problems are easily solvable, however, with cards like Ogre Battle Driver, as well as Lovisa Cold Eyes. Both of these cards are, price-wise, very inexpensive ways of making sure that your 1/1 warrior tokens from the Mobilize mechanic can get in for as much as 3 damage apiece. You also simply get to put Lovisa Cold Eyes into your Commander deck, and I'm always looking for an excuse to do that. Apart from that, if you wanted some more expensive cards to use, you could always try Renewed Solidarity or Erois, God of Victory. Renewed Solidarity will not only increase the power of your warrior tokens, but it will also replace all of the warrior tokens that die at end of turn with warrior tokens that live forever. Erois God of Victory may be a little bit more expensive to get your hands on a copy of, but it is very much worth it to do so, as this will make sure that all of your mobilized creatures can get in without having to worry about dying in combat. But the last card I want to look at is a nearly forgotten relic from the old school that meets at the nexus of budget and power for a deck like this, and that is Reconnaissance. Very cheap to get on the table in the first place, Reconnaissance allows you to simply remove your mobilized creatures from combat, again, allowing them to attack turn over turn. Reconnaissance is a nostalgic, classic piece from the early days of the game that is perfect for a deck like this, and is only a couple of dollars to get your hands on. You should do so. That's all for this week's Coffee Break. Join us next week where we'll talk about the best ways to hum your dinger. Here's Dev. Thanks, Dev. Here are your power rankings. A final score of 67 for this deck. And honestly, I feel kind of bad about making the resiliency a 4. I feel like resilience could be like a 4.5, and that'd be all right, because sometimes all you have to do is get one creature on the board, and now you have a bunch of creatures on the table, effectively, sort of, kind of. And Dalkovan Encampment plus War Leader's Call is actually help you get in the last few points of damage. You got some reach in the form of Burst Lightning. Again, I feel like this deck is slightly more resilient than I've rated it here, but again, I wouldn't go all the way to 5 on it. That said, we do have a wacky amount of synergy in the deck. We attack from a bunch of different angles, so the offense is high and the consistency is relatively high for a 3-color aggro deck. But we don't always just win off of aggro wing. Like I said, this deck has a lot of potential angles to attack from, whether it's War Leader's Call or even Ellis Core. And this week, I was able to get a pretty decent example game where we're able to come from a few different angles and pull off a win. Now, our hand looks good for this opening game against Red-White Forge here, which is a matchup we should be pretty scared of. Our opponent starts on Elegant Parlor. We start on Skrelf. Good opening play, but they're going to counter that with a Torch to the Tower, exiling it forever. We're not too worried about it, though, because we can actually resolve a Basri Tomorrow's Champion and a Stadium Headliner on our turn 2. We're definitely going to stay on the table for this game. Opponent goes, plays their land for the turn, reads Basri, then ignores it and plays an Urabras Forge so they can go ahead and get that going. We let their token through, we're just going to take one, and then we'll play our third land and go with Arabella this turn. This looks like we can't do much else, but we will make another token with Basri Tomorrow's Champion here. Get a little lifelink cat, and that will increase the count of small creatures we have for when Arabella attacks next turn. We get in with Stadium Headliner, do a couple of damage, and opponent is going to play Get Lost on our Arabella here. We almost concede expecting a Day of Judgment, but it doesn't quite happen. They get in with their Urabras Forge token, and then we can drop a War Leader's Call onto the table and do a bunch of damage this turn. We're going to use a map token and try to increase the power of our lifelink creature. Can't quite pull it off, but that's fine. We still end up putting them at 11 this turn, just from attacking with a couple of guys. They get an Elspeth Sunslayer and then double up on their Urabras Forge tokens. Pretty nice. We're actually going to give them a nice for doing that, but we get our fiance now. It's Ellis Core coming down, and this will actually have a huge effect on the game. We're going to rip a Get Lost on this Elspeth Sunslayer, Stormslayer rather, and then go ahead and get in with all of our boys. Sure, they can block up, but they'll just take a double block on the Basri here and still end up going down to a very low life total of 3, and then Ellis Core triggers and end up putting them at 1 before it's all said and done. They can drop a Biza the Bounding Spring, go back up to 5 and get a couple of tokens, map on the Biza and draw their land, play it, come in with an Urabras Forge token, put us at 6. So all looks okay for them over there, but we get a Zurgo Thunder's Decree and a Stadium Headliner. We win the game basically no matter how they block or don't block this turn, and they figured that out pretty quickly. So game over for our opponent. It was a valiant effort. Good game, opponent. That is basically it from Mardu Mobilize, y'all. Long story short, cut that curve down. Don't play anything too expensive. Don't be afraid to fill out important 1 and 2 drop slots with legendary creatures. And maybe most importantly, don't assume you're going to win basically any game off combat damage alone. This deck has a lot of tricks at its disposal, and most of them are not too cute. They're actually just right. But aside from that, I'm more or less done, y'all. Deck list for both the budget and big boy versions of this down there in the description box. I don't have an affiliate link. I'm just doing that because I care about you and I want you to have the deck list all in one place like you like to have. So if you appreciate all the work that I do, maybe consider liking the video. It's the one shaped like a thumb. We mentioned it earlier. You can also subscribe to the channel or sub to the sandwich, whichever one you want to do. If you're hungry, you can sub to the sandwich, but I do have a Patreon. It is $1 a month at the lowest tier to join, and then you can vote on what content we do around here, and it will also support my ability to continue doing this as my job, which I would like to do. And I'm pretty sure I'm worth $1 a month. $1 a month? I'm working for really cheap here, guys. Just $1. Come on, $1 a month. But even if you don't have that to swing, I just appreciate that you're still here watching it. Runtime's delicious. But that is about all I've got for this one. So get down there in the comments section. Let me know how you felt about all the goings on and how you built your Mardu Mobilize. And I will catch y'all on the flip side. Or I'll catch you cats later, which is what I normally say. I am Dev from the Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.